Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Two miles underground in the abandoned mines of Bonanza, Colorado, a most unexpected discovery once shocked the mining community. It wasn't gold, silver, or any precious metal that caught their attention. It was beavers, hundreds of them, gnawing away at support timbers, creating a bizarre wildlife infestation that threatened to collapse the entire network of tunnels. While the town above slowly faded into history, the abandoned mines below became home to colonies of industrious rodents who created one of the strangest problems in mining history. Nestled high in Colorado's Cochetopa Hills at nearly 9,500 feet above sea level, Bonanza emerged like countless western mining towns. With a lucky strike, ambitious dreams, and the frenzied rush of thousands seeking instant fortune. The tale of this particular settlement, however, winds through remarkable highs, devastating lows, and peculiar twists that make this ghost town uniquely fascinating among America's abandoned mining communities. The story begins in spring 1880. Two prospectors, Pete McCardo and John Stansberry, made their way through the rugged terrain of what would later become Bonanza. They weren't even searching for precious metals that fateful day. They were simply seeking a shortcut across Marshall Pass to reach the Gunnison country. In classic mining lore fashion, they accidentally stumbled upon oxidized quartz in quantities substantial enough to trace back to the original vein. They promptly staked their claim, naming it the Exchequer Mine. News of their discovery spread with remarkable speed across mining circuits. Within just 2 years, approximately 5,000 people had flocked to the hills surrounding Kerber Creek. The familiar Western narrative unfolded. A promising vein in a rock face transformed pristine wilderness into a bustling boomtown almost overnight. What distinguishes Bonanza in these early days was that it initially wasn't one settlement at all, but 4 competing communities all vying for dominance. Exchequerville built around the original mine, Sedgwick developing as a separate mining community, Kerber City named after the creek running through the area, and finally Bonanza itself. These 4 settlements literally quarreled for preference, each attempting to establish itself as the district's primary town. Geographic proximity made their long-term coexistence impractical, and eventually Bonanza absorbed the other 3, though Exchequerville resisted absorption longest, believing it could maintain independence due to its association with one of the oldest and most productive mineral properties. By 1881, Bonanza secured official municipal incorporation as Bonanza City. During its peak in the early 1880s, historical sources claim the population swelled to approximately 20,000 people, a figure possibly exaggerated, as frontier towns often inflated their importance to attract investment and settlers. At its height, Bonanza boasted 2 principal streets lined with creaky wooden boardwalks, typical of frontier boomtowns. An astonishing 40 saloons catered to thirsty miners, creating such disorder that both a United States deputy marshal and a substantial local police force struggled to maintain even basic order. This remarkable concentration of drinking establishments earned Bonanza its reputation as wild and woolly by period standards, no small distinction in an era when frontier towns weren't exactly known for their refinement. Despite this rowdy reputation, Bonanza developed considerable infrastructure, including an organized fire department, a banking institution, a custom-built smelter, and not one but two competing newspapers, the Enterprise and the Bonanza News, which operated with less success than its competitor. One curious distinction set Bonanza apart from nearly every other mining settlement of its era. Despite following typical patterns of development, the town never established any formal religious institutions. This absence of formal religious structures persisted throughout the town's entire history. The economic heart of Bonanza consisted of its network of approximately 70 mineral properties scattered throughout nearby gulches. The original Exchequer mine maintained its status as one of the finest in the camp throughout its history. Operated vigorously by Rathvon and Company during peak production years, it consistently shipped approximately 3 tons of rich ore daily to regional smelters and employed a large workforce. The crown jewel of Bonanza's mining operations was undoubtedly the Empress Josephine mine, recognized as the single most important property in the entire camp. During early production, one carload alone yielded $20,000, an enormous sum for the era. Unfortunately, the original owners employed haphazard mining techniques, sinking shafts and burrowing into veins without method, order, or system. Despite these inefficiencies, total production reached approximately $200,000 during the boom period. As miners dug deeper, however, they encountered increasingly difficult conditions. The shaft extended to 420 feet, where further development halted due to water inflow, with no existing pumps of the era capable of managing the volume encountered. Among other notable operations, the Raleigh mine stands out for its impressive production history. It represented one of the richest strikes in the district's history and sold for the then record price of $100,000 in 1881. Over its lifetime, it produced more than $6 million worth of ore, an extraordinary return on investment. Life in Bonanza wasn't solely focused on mineral extraction. The community experienced characteristic mining frontier challenges, claim-jumping disputes, vigilante justice, occasional riots, and various violent crimes. The most notorious criminal incident involved the killing of an Irishman named John O'Hara by a Negro musician known as Bush Forbush, a former Arkansas resident renowned for his marksmanship who could pop off the head of a squirrel with the greatest of ease. The murder occurred following an unspecified quarrel when Forbush deliberately shot O'Hara during a street confrontation. The incident provoked an organized response from the camp's Irish population, who prepared for lynching. Forbush barricaded himself in a log cabin with his gun protruding between logs. In a surprising turn, when confronted by an unnamed man, Forbush meekly surrendered his weapon and followed instructions to flee over the hills to Saguache. He was eventually tried and acquitted, after which he disappeared from local history, only to resurface years later leading a delegation of Arkansas-colored men to Washington, D.C., supporting Grover Cleveland's campaign. The social fabric of daily life reveals itself through newspaper accounts preserved in the Enterprise. Recreation centered primarily around saloons, billiards, and bowling facilities, as the paper noted that billiards and 10 pins are the chief sources of amusement to our young men. By the 1890s, Bonanza's fortunes reversed dramatically. Competing mineral discoveries in Ashcroft and Aspen successfully drew investment capital and speculative interest away from the once booming camp. The population contracted from thousands to approximately 100 residents by 1900. Former full-time miners adapted by transitioning to ranching as their primary livelihood while maintaining minimal mining activity for supplemental income. As mines were abandoned, an unexpected ecological complication arose. Large numbers of beavers invaded the abandoned mine workings and began gnawing on critical support timbers. These industrious rodents penetrated as deep as 2 miles underground, creating significant safety hazards by damaging structural supports. The problem persisted and intensified over subsequent decades until, by the 1930s, the beaver overpopulation reached such critical levels that professional trappers were hired to address the infestation. This unusual environmental complication represents a distinctive challenge rarely documented in other mining districts. Despite the general decline, several significant attempts were made to revive Bonanza's fortunes. The most notable effort came under General W.S. Rosecrans, who learned about the declining camp through personal connections and applied a strategic approach. He secured controlling interest in the Empress Josephine mine, then expanded holdings to include 8 additional properties, establishing a dominant position in the district. Leveraging his personal network, he recruited wealthy New York associates as financial backers and established a mining company with substantial eastern capital. These revival efforts were fueled partly by a growing geological consensus that Bonanza was situated on a significant mineral belt, theoretically extending from Cripple Creek through to Creede. Mining experts postulated a potential continuous gold belt throughout this extensive region, raising the tantalizing possibility of another Cripple Creek or second Aspen. This theory generated renewed attention and triggered over 2,000 new mining claims filed during this period of optimism. The syndicate maintained active investment for approximately 3 years, consolidating around 200 acres of mining property with clear legal titles. Despite significant capital expenditure, however, these revival efforts ultimately fell victim to fundamental geological and economic realities that couldn't be overcome through investment alone. The death knell for Bonanza's aspirations as a thriving mining center came in 1937, when a devastating fire destroyed virtually the entire business district along with numerous residential cabins and houses. The economic impact was compounded by the complete absence of rebuilding. None of the destroyed structures were reconstructed, a clear indicator of the town's diminished prospects. Perched at precisely 9,465 feet above sea level in Colorado's magnificent Cochetopa Hills, Bonanza stands as testament to the boom and bust cycle that shapes so much of the American West. From the accidental discovery that launched a mining stampede, through decades of prosperity, decline, and attempted revivals, to its current status as a quiet reminder of frontier ambitions, Bonanza's story encompasses the full arc of Western mining history, including those unexpected beavers who made their home in the abandoned tunnels where gold fever once reigned. Imagine surviving one of America's most notorious disasters as a child, only to later find yourself barricaded in a makeshift cave, fighting for your life against attacking warriors while deep in untamed Arizona territory. The year is 1862, and as bullets fly and rocks crash down upon your shelter, your only advantage comes from the most unlikely source: a crude wooden bed that your companions had mocked just days earlier. This isn't Hollywood fiction. This was the reality for Theodore Boggs and his fellow miners at a place called Big Bug Creek, a settlement that would rise from these violent beginnings to become a vibrant community with $1 million mining operation, only to disappear almost completely from Arizona's landscape and memory by the early 20th century. Today on Southwest Desert, we uncover the remarkable true story of Big Bug Mining Town, a place where legendary family legacies, frontier violence, innovative survival tactics, and industrial ambition converge to create a uniquely American story that time has nearly erased. The story of Big Bug Mining Town begins, as many Western tales do, with a remarkable pioneer. Theodore Boggs wasn't just any fortune seeker when he arrived in what would become Yavapai County, Arizona in 1862. He carried with him a legacy that touched multiple chapters of American expansion. His father had served as Missouri governor, notorious for expelling Mormon settlers from the state in 1846. Even more impressively, through his mother, Boggs could trace his lineage directly to the quintessential American frontiersman, Daniel Boone. But perhaps most extraordinary was Boggs's own childhood survival story. At approximately 10 years old, young Theodore had been part of the infamous Donner Party expedition, while countless others perished in the harsh winter conditions and subsequent starvation that has made the Donner Party synonymous with frontier tragedy. Boggs emerged alive, carrying psychological scars but also the resilience that would serve him well on Arizona's dangerous frontier. By 1862, this survivor of one of America's most harrowing pioneer disasters found himself drawn to the untouched mineral potential of Arizona territory. After extensive prospecting throughout the region that would become Yavapai County, Boggs established a settlement along the promising mineral-rich banks of Big Bug Creek, approximately 12 miles southeast of what would later become Prescott. What Boggs couldn't have known was that this creek with its peculiar name would become the stage for another life-or-death struggle, one that would later be remembered as emblematic of the violent cultural collision occurring throughout the American West. The 1860s Arizona Territory was a dangerous place for settlers. Historical records, written from the perspective of these newcomers, describe the region as Indian-infested, language that reveals both the fear and cultural attitudes of the era. For indigenous peoples, these miners represented unwelcome intruders on ancestral lands. For the miners, each day brought the possibility of conflict. At the Big Bug claim, Boggs collaborated with 3 other miners to work the promising deposits. Understanding the dangers, they engineered their living quarters with defensive considerations in mind. They excavated a shallow cave into the mountainside, enhancing it with a protective lean-to entrance constructed from local materials. Poles and grass formed a practical roof providing both shade and weather protection. One particularly comfort-minded miner invested time in constructing a crude wooden bedstead, a luxury that amused his companions, who considered such refinements unnecessary in their frontier conditions. This seemingly trivial detail would soon prove critically important. For approximately 1 month, the miners worked undisturbed. Then came the attack. Their first warning came from their loyal dog, whose distinctive alarmed barking alerted the men to danger. Despite being pierced by an arrow, the dog continued its warning, sacrificing itself to protect its masters. The indigenous warriors employed sophisticated tactics, rolling heavy rocks down onto the shelter in an attempt to collapse it. In that desperate moment, the miners repurposed the previously mocked bedstead as critical structural support against the crushing weight from above. Simultaneously, they quickly excavated strategic firing positions facing the uphill positions where the warriors had placed themselves. The attackers, unaware of these defensive adaptations, had positioned themselves vulnerably. A coordinated defensive volley from the miners killed 2 warriors, creating a tactical advantage. The indigenous fighters retrieved their fallen comrades before making a tactical retreat, later conducting visible cremation rituals for their dead within sight of the miners. Though physically unharmed, the psychological impact of this violent encounter lingered with the miners, another layer of trauma for the young Donner Party survivor and his companions. Despite these dangerous beginnings, the settlement along Big Bug Creek grew rapidly. Theodore Boggs established himself among the earliest non-indigenous settlers in the area, and the promise of mineral wealth quickly attracted additional prospectors and settlers. What began as isolated mining claims transformed into an organized community. By its peak, the Big Bug community was described as both active and lively, with approximately 100 residents in the immediate vicinity of the camp, and more scattered throughout the surrounding mining operations. On March 31, 1879, the settlement achieved official recognition with the establishment of a post office under the name Big Bug. Interestingly, the community would undergo a couple of name changes in its relatively short official existence. On November 28, 1879, less than 8 months after its establishment, the settlement was renamed Red Rock. This name lasted approximately 16 months before being restored to Big Bug. The post office initially operated directly from Theodore Boggs's residence, situated slightly east of the main town development. The mail distribution system featured horseback delivery service throughout the region, with assistant postmistress Miss Dawson personally conducting mail routes to outlying mining operations and homesteads. As the community developed, so did its industrial capacity. Significant mineral processing infrastructure was established, including the Big Bug smelter, constructed to process local ore extractions. The operation specialized in processing placer gold and silver deposits, with peak production occurring throughout the 1880s and 1890s. The economic impact was substantial. Historical records document production exceeding $1 million in precious metals, a tremendous output considering the period's economics. This production created a regional economic hub centered on mineral extraction, supported by facilities like the Hitchcock Boarding House, which provided accommodation for miners. But like many mining communities throughout the American West, Big Bug's prosperity wouldn't last. The exact causes of its decline aren't fully documented, but the pattern follows that of countless other mining towns. Diminishing mineral returns led to population decrease and eventually abandonment. On March 31, 1910, exactly 31 years after the initial establishment of the post office, postal operations were officially discontinued, signaling the community's decline. Over time, Big Bug transitioned from an active settlement to an abandoned mining site, with the structures that once formed this vibrant community gradually disappearing from the landscape. Today, only subtle indications of historical mining activity remain visible along Big Bug Creek. The original structures are no longer intact or identifiable, and the site represents the typical pattern of abandoned mining communities in what was once Arizona territory. The story of Big Bug Mining Town encapsulates the broader narrative of the American West, the collision of cultures, the boom and bust cycle of resource extraction, the resilience and innovation of pioneers like Theodore Boggs, and the ultimate impermanence of communities built on finite resources. From the dramatic defense of the mining camp against indigenous warriors to the development of a thriving community with industrial infrastructure, Big Bug's 3-decade journey from establishment to abandonment represents a microcosm of Western expansion and retreat. As we drive through Arizona today, how many of us realize that just off the beaten path lie the nearly invisible remnants of such communities? Places where people like Theodore Boggs, the Donner Party survivor and descendant of American legends, fought, built, thrived, and ultimately moved on, leaving behind only subtle traces and compelling stories. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Today, on Southwest Desert, we journey to a place that no longer exists. A ghost town so thoroughly erased from the landscape that even the most dedicated explorers will find no trace of its existence. Welcome to the story of Amoise, New Mexico, a gold mining boomtown whose meteoric rise and dramatic fall tells us much about the dreams, ambitions, and harsh realities of America's western frontier. If you were to search for Amoise on any modern map, you'd find nothing. Drive through the spectacular Rio Hondo Canyon today, with its breathtaking mountain vistas and pristine natural beauty, and you'd never know that a bustling community of hundreds once called this place home. Not a single log cabin remains standing, not one storefront survives to tell the tale. Amoise has been systematically dismantled, its physical presence erased so completely that it exists now only in historical records and the fading memories of a few descendants of those who lived there. But in 1893, this canyon was alive with activity, hope, and the promise of gold. The story begins like many Western tales, with an ambitious prospector drawn by rumors of gold. Al Helfenstein arrived in the Rio Hondo Canyon in early 1893, during a time of nationwide economic challenges. But unlike many mining settlements of the era that bore the names of men or descriptive geographical features, this town would be named for a woman, Amoise Helfenstein, Al's wife. Amoise was one of those remarkable pioneer women who braved the harsh conditions of frontier life, demonstrating extraordinary courage in a time when the comforts of established cities were left far behind. The Helfensteins began their ambitious venture by transforming an existing dilapidated cabin into what would serve as the town's first hotel. Soon after, they established vital postal services, creating a lifeline to the outside world. With these basic foundations in place, a community began to form in the picturesque but challenging terrain of the canyon. Where there's gold, there are dreamers, and where there are dreamers gathered in remote locations, there are opportunities for merchants. Enter Gerson Gustdorf, a visionary businessman whose commercial instincts would help transform an empty canyon into a functioning town. Gustdorf wasn't just another prospector hoping to strike it rich by finding gold. He saw opportunity in supporting those who sought the precious metal. With remarkable determination, he assembled a comprehensive inventory of essential mining supplies. The challenges Gustdorf faced were immense. There was no proper road leading to the fledgling settlement, so he pioneered the first vehicular route through the densely wooded aspen forest. At first, Gustdorf operated his business from a temporary tent storefront, a testament to frontier resourcefulness. But as Amoise grew, so did his establishment, progressing to a permanent wood-framed structure that represented the first substantial non-mining building in town and served as a community hub for supplies and information. The transformation of the Rio Hondo Canyon happened with astonishing speed. As if overnight, entertainment and social establishments proliferated throughout the settlement. Multiple saloons opened their doors, offering miners a place to unwind after long days of backbreaking work. Dance halls provided entertainment and social gathering spaces. The uninhabited canyon quickly became a bustling community as prospectors arrived in waves, drawn by rumors of gold. They were followed by support workers and service providers, all caught up in the atmosphere of excitement and opportunity that pervaded Amoise. Mining operations took various forms in and around Amoise. Some prospectors focused on gold panning operations along the Rio Hondo waterway, utilizing traditional placer mining techniques to exploit alluvial deposits in the river sediments. Others took on the more labor-intensive work of tunnel excavation, driving deep into the mountain faces in search of embedded ore deposits. These efforts weren't in vain. The area did indeed contain significant gold deposits, and extraction began at multiple locations, seeming to validate the area's mining potential and the hopes of those who had risked everything to come here. Among the notable mining operations was the Shoshone mine, owned and operated by Gerson Gusdorf and his brother. This mine attracted attention from prominent regional figures, including Governor John L. Root of Colorado, who offered the impressive sum of $20,000 to acquire the claim, a substantial amount indicating the perceived value of the property. The Gusdorfs declined to sell, believing their mine would yield even greater returns. It was a decision they would come to regret. For all its promise, Amoise faced a fundamental challenge that would ultimately prove insurmountable: transportation. The difficult canyon terrain limited viable routes for moving goods in and out of the settlement. The costs associated with transporting extracted ore to processing facilities were steep, and the technological limitations of available transportation methods created an economic equation that simply didn't work. These transportation costs severely eroded profit margins, making otherwise viable mines economically unfeasible. It was a business obstacle that no amount of gold in the ground could overcome. While mining operations struggled, another enterprise found more success: real estate speculation. The Rio Hondo Placer Company, backed by Denver-based investors, recognized an alternative profit potential. Rather than focusing on mineral extraction, they shifted to property development, capitalizing on the initial excitement and population influx. These external investors prioritized land sales over mining, exploiting speculative fever rather than actual mining potential. It may have been the only profitable enterprise in the settlement. As economic realities became increasingly apparent, Amoise began to experience a progressive exodus. Disappointed prospectors departed, followed by the closure of supporting businesses and services. This created a cascading effect of population decline that would ultimately hollow out the community. At its peak, Amoise had reached approximately 350 residents, a substantial population for a remote mining settlement. But within just 12 months, from 1893 to 1894, the town experienced an almost complete abandonment. The life cycle of Amoise was remarkably brief, even by mining town standards, with a dramatic contrast between initial enthusiasm and rapid decline. Within a year of its founding, Amoise had essentially become a ghost town. But the story of Amoise wasn't quite over. Approximately 2 years after the initial boom and bust, fresh gold was discovered in proximity to the original settlement, specifically on nearby Gold Hill. This discovery reignited interest in the area's mineral potential and gave Amoise a second chance at life. By 1897, the town had reconstituted a population of approximately 200 residents, representing a substantial recovery from its previous abandonment. This included both returning miners and fresh arrivals, all sharing renewed confidence in the area's mining potential. During this revival period, the settlement boasted 10 producing mines, a significant increase in organized extraction efforts demonstrating more established and systematic operations. These mines represented substantial capital investment in the area and produced an impressive daily output of 600 tons of diversified ore. While gold remained the primary target, mining operations expanded to include silver extraction, copper ore, and lead deposits, adding mineral diversity to the local economy. The economic picture looked bright enough that miners commanded wages of $4 per day, relatively competitive compensation for the period and sufficient to attract and retain skilled labor. It seemed that Amoise might defy the odds and establish itself as a permanent fixture in the New Mexico mining landscape. Despite this promising revival, Amousette's story was approaching its final chapter. Significant copper ore deposits were identified further upstream, specifically at the head of Rio Hondo Canyon. This represented a shift in focus from gold to copper and drew attention and investment away from Amoise. A new settlement named Twining was established as the focal point of mining activity, developed around these copper deposits rather than gold. Twining benefited from lessons learned in earlier mining attempts and redirected population and commercial activity upstream. The result was the complete and permanent abandonment of Amoise. Remaining residents departed, commercial operations were discontinued, and structures were eventually dismantled or left to decay. The once promising settlement was completely erased from the landscape. Today, as travelers drive through the Rio Hondo Canyon, they pass directly through what was once Amoise without even knowing it existed. No historical markers identify the location, no ruins remain to be explored. The town that once compared itself to the famous Cripple Creek mining district in its potential has vanished so completely that it might as well have been a mirage. What if the story of one of the American West's most remarkable frontiersmen, a skilled scout, a trusted guide for the U.S. military, and the man who sparked one of Arizona's greatest gold rushes and gold camps, began with a name that sounds like it belonged to a woman? And what if that man, despite being illiterate, left his name carved into American history, an inscription that has survived nearly 2 centuries? This is the extraordinary tale of Pauline Weaver, a man whose life defied the conventional narratives of Western expansion. Born with mixed heritage in 1800, he traversed a changing America with a foot in 2 worlds during one of the most transformative periods in the nation's history. From Tennessee to the Pacific Northwest, from military expeditions to gold discoveries that would transform territories, Pauline Weaver's journey is not just the story of one remarkable man, it's the story of America itself, told through the experiences of someone who lived at the margins of multiple cultures. The year was 1832, when a small party of travelers approached the ancient and mysterious Casa Grande ruins, in what would later become Arizona. One of the men stepped forward and, with the help of a literate companion, left his mark. Pauline Weaver was here, 1832. That inscription, still visible today, stands as one of the earliest written records of European-American presence in the region. Pauline Weaver was born in Tennessee in 1800, the son of a white father and a Native American mother who was herself the daughter of a chief. His mother named him Paulino, which gradually evolved into Pauline through usage, a name that, while seemingly unusual for a rugged frontiersman, was actually relatively common among individuals of mixed ancestry during this period. What makes Weaver's story so compelling isn't just his name, but how he managed to navigate between worlds during a time of immense cultural conflict and territorial expansion. Weaver represented a fascinating paradox in American frontier history. Born with a foot in 2 worlds, European and Native American, he became instrumental in the westward expansion that would ultimately displace many indigenous peoples. Yet his own heritage and close relationships with native communities made him uniquely positioned as a bridge between these colliding worlds. Almost immediately after gaining independence from what historical accounts colorfully describe as his mother's buckskin apron strings, Weaver embarked on a wandering lifestyle that would define his existence. His travels took him from his Tennessee birthplace all the way to Puget Sound in the Northwest. But it was in Arizona territories where he would leave his most indelible mark. It's particularly fascinating that despite his historical significance, significant enough that he left his name at Casa Grande, he himself couldn't read or write. The inscription was almost certainly made by one of his traveling companions on his behalf. By 1847, Weaver's reputation as a skilled guide had reached military circles. General Stephen W. Kearny recruited him for his frontier expertise during a critical period of American territorial expansion. Weaver's most significant military contribution came when he guided the Mormon Battalion on their journey from New Mexico territories to California, a treacherous route through largely unmapped terrain. For his services, he received substantial compensation in the form of a land grant near present-day Banning, California, but farming would prove a poor fit for a man of Weaver's temperament. Men of the frontier often struggled with settlement. They were creatures of movement, of open spaces. The constraints of agricultural life, the routine, the boundaries, were antithetical to everything that defined them. Weaver was no exception. The moment he tried to settle down, he felt the pull of the wilderness calling him back. And back he went, abandoning his California land grant to return to his beloved Arizona territories. Like other mountain men of his era, Weaver equipped himself with the tools essential for wilderness survival. A long-barreled, muzzle-loading flintlock rifle, later upgrading to more modern percussion cap firearms, and a Bowie-style knife that served multiple purposes from skinning game to eating. But unlike most frontiersmen of his day, who formed groups for mutual protection against the dangers of the wilderness, Weaver exhibited a strong preference for solitary travel. This independent streak made him something of an anomaly, though he shared this trait with another famous frontiersman, Bill Williams. Both men seemed to prefer the company of nature and occasional Native American companions to the settlements of their own society. However, there was one significant exception to Weaver's solitary habits, an expedition that would change the course of Arizona history. In the early 1860s, following modest gold discoveries at La Paz, Weaver assembled a diverse party including Major A.H. Peoples, Jack Swilling, who would later found Phoenix, several other white settlers, and a contingent of Mexican assistants. Dissatisfied with the limited findings at La Paz, the group continued their prospecting journey through harsh desert landscapes toward the Bradshaw Mountains. What's remarkable about this expedition is how chance played such a pivotal role. The group was actually tracking missing horses when they stumbled upon one of the richest gold deposits in Arizona history, a perfect example of how many of the West's most significant discoveries happened not through methodical exploration but through serendipity. The expedition had established a strategically located base camp near a crucial water source that Weaver had located, a stream they named Weaver Creek in his honor. The broader area became known as Antelope Valley after they successfully hunted several antelope that provided much-needed provisions. When their horses wandered off from camp one morning, Weaver dispatched his Mexican assistants to recover the animals. While tracking the horses over a nearby high hill, these men made an unexpected discovery. They found what they called chispas, gold nuggets the size of pebbles, scattered across the terrain. They returned to camp with both the recovered horses and a handful of gold specimens. Major Peoples, part of Weaver's expedition, was so excited by this discovery that historical accounts note he rushed to investigate without even waiting for breakfast. Peoples personally collected $7,000 worth of gold, an enormous sum for the era, before returning to camp. The party quickly harvested the accessible surface deposits before word of their discovery could spread. But spread it did. News of the gold discovery triggered an immediate and massive influx of prospectors. Both white settlers and Mexican miners converged on the location, which became known as Rich Hill due to its abundant deposits. The rapidly developing settlement underwent sequential name changes reflecting its growth. Initially called Weaver Camp in honor of the expedition's guide, it evolved into the more established Weaverville as its population increased and finally simplified to Weaver as its permanent designation. The gold rush was so intense that strict claim limitations had to be implemented due to overwhelming demand. Each miner was restricted to claims of only 200 square feet, and claim jumping became prevalent as competition for valuable ground intensified. Before the placer deposits were depleted, the area yielded approximately $1 million in gold, again, an astronomical sum for the 1860s. Additional lode deposits were later discovered at both Weaver and the neighboring camp of Octave, which earned its distinctive name as it was founded by 8 partner prospectors. Yet despite having a mining camp named after him and being at the center of one of Arizona's most significant gold rushes, Weaver himself quickly departed from the settlement bearing his name. This is one of the great ironies of Weaver's story. He facilitated this massive gold discovery that transformed the region, yet he himself had little interest in mining. He lacked the temperament and patience required for such operations. For Weaver, the journey was always more appealing than the destination. True to form, Weaver returned to his preferred occupation as a wilderness guide. In 1867, he secured another position as a professional guide at Camp Lincoln, a military outpost later renamed Camp Verde. Even while employed at the camp, Weaver maintained his independence by refusing the provided military quarters. Instead, he established a personal living space in a tent outside the main reservation boundaries. Throughout his life, Weaver continued his pattern of association with Native Americans despite the escalating tensions of the era, a reflection perhaps of his mixed heritage and his ability to move between cultural worlds. This brings us to the circumstances of Weaver's death on June 21, 1867, while stationed at Camp Lincoln. When he failed to report for scheduled duties that morning, military personnel were dispatched to investigate his absence. They discovered him deceased in his tent, the scene strikingly orderly, his body carefully wrapped in a blanket with personal effects neatly arranged. Evidence suggested he had been sharing his accommodations with an Apache individual, a notable detail given the context of military-tribal relations at the time. The historical record notes that Weaver had sustained an arrow wound to the shoulder approximately 1 year prior to his death. Though the arrow shaft was removed, the arrowhead remained embedded in his body. Medical assessment attributed his death to complications from this retained arrowhead, a slow, delayed consequence of frontier violence that had become an intimate part of Weaver's physical being. Weaver received a formal military burial with full honors, but even in death, Weaver's journey wasn't over. His remains were exhumed and relocated to San Francisco in 1892 after the subsidence of regional conflicts with Native American tribes. All military personnel interred at Camp Lincoln were similarly relocated as part of this process. Yet Weaver's legacy in Arizona remained strong enough that in 1928, a public movement was initiated in Prescott to return him to the territory where he had made his greatest impact. The effort sought to bring him back to the area where he had established his most permanent camp in 1863. His final resting place was established on the grounds of the Charlotte Hall Museum in Prescott, marked with a significant commemorative monument, a large stone base supporting a bronze memorial plaque with the inscription, Pauline Weaver, truly a great man. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you would like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Happy trails. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.